For centuries, humanity was considered insignificant. Not a threat. Not a rival. Barely a participant. In a galaxy dominated by civilizations older than human history itself, humans were dismissed as a transient curiosity, another short-lived species clawing its way toward relevance. Their lifespan was brief. Their governments unstable. Their technology inelegant compared to the polished marvels of ancient empires. The Galactic Council noticed them only when required. When humanity petitioned for expanded trade access, the request was delayed. When they requested joint defense initiatives, it was archived. When they spoke of emerging threats beyond mapped space, the chamber listened politely and moved on. Humanity was ignored by the galaxy. They lacked the fleets to intimidate. They lacked the territory to matter. They lacked the pedigree to be taken seriously. Those in power dismissed them with practiced ease. Too divided. Too young. Too inefficient. The Council's analysts labeled humanity non-critical. Their systems were peripheral. Their expansion slow. Their influence negligible. A species to be guided, not feared. And so, the Council watched. They watched as humanity struggled through internal conflicts. They watched as human colonies adapted to hostile worlds with stubborn persistence. They watched, but never intervened. What the Council never understood was that humanity had evolved on a world that never stopped trying to kill them. Earth was violent, unstable, and unforgiving. Survival there had never been guaranteed. Every advancement humanity made was born from crisis, not comfort. Humans did not fear instability. They learned from it. While ancient civilizations perfected tradition, humanity perfected response. While others relied on doctrines thousands of years old, humans rewrote their playbooks every generation. Loss was not failure, it was feedback. But none of that appeared in Council metrics. Human ships looked crude. Human strategy appeared chaotic. Human politics seemed endlessly fragmented. So the galaxy dismissed them. And humanity did nothing to correct the assumption. They stopped arguing for attention. Stopped demanding acknowledgement. Stopped warning those who refused to listen. Instead, humanity went quiet. Not in retreat, but in focus. Resources shifted. Research accelerated. Coordination replaced competition. The noise of human politics faded into something colder, sharper, more deliberate. No declarations were made. No threats issued. There was no moment the galaxy could point to and say, "This is when it changed." Because the change was internal. The Council continued to watch trade flows and fleet registries, and saw nothing alarming. Human activity declined. Their diplomatic presence faded. Analysts marked them as stagnant, contained, harmless. No one asked why human systems grew more synchronized. No one questioned why their ships moved differently through space. No one noticed when decision-making across human colonies began to look unified. By the time the Galactic Council finally realized something was wrong, it wasn't because humanity had announced itself. It was because the galaxy's usual mechanisms stopped working. Borders meant less. Sanctions failed. Influence no longer flowed where it used to. And when the Council looked up from its chambers, expecting resistance, they found silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of control. Because while the galaxy had been busy dismissing humanity, humanity had been preparing to decide what happened next. And the Council, for the first time in its long history, was no longer watching a species rise. It was watching itself become irrelevant. The Council did not tighten its grip out of fear. It did so out of habit. Humanity's growing coordination, their refusal to play predictable roles, their quiet withdrawal from galactic theater, all of it unsettled the old powers. Not because humans were strong, but because they were no longer easy to categorize. And in the Council's long history, anything that resisted classification was corrected. Or contained. The first measures were administrative. Human trade agreements were suspended under newly revised compliance standards. Inspections of human vessels multiplied, each one longer and more invasive than the last. Cargo was delayed, rerouted, or seized outright for review. Entire shipments spoiled while paperwork circulated through Council offices that never intended to resolve it. The Council called it oversight. Humanity called it a warning. Trade was cut soon after. Key hyperspace corridors were reclassified as restricted for strategic stability. Human merchant fleets were denied docking rights in ports they had relied on for decades. Long-standing contracts were voided overnight, justified by regulations that only human technology somehow failed to meet. Supply chains fractured. Colonies felt it first. Medical shortages, industrial slowdowns, delayed reconstruction efforts. The Council watched closely, expecting unrest to follow. It always did. Then came the revocation of rights. Human travelers lost legal protections in Council space. Appeals were dismissed without hearing. Human-owned stations were seized or dismantled under the justification of preventive security. Even humanitarian exemptions were denied, their requests trapped in endless procedural loops until urgency expired into irrelevance. Humanity's voice was removed with bureaucratic precision. Observer status revoked. Access credentials deactivated. Communications filtered, then silenced. Finally, isolation. A formal resolution passed with little debate. Human space was designated restricted. Patrol fleets established exclusion zones around every known human system. Automated beacons broadcast warnings across multiple frequencies. Unauthorized access, Council enforced. Humanity was pushed into isolation. The Council expected collapse. They had seen this pattern countless times. Young species cut off from trade turned inward. Political unity fractured under scarcity. Colonies rebelled. Economies failed. Eventually, what remained returned to the Council diminished, compliant, grateful for reinstatement. This was not cruelty, in the Council's view. It was management. Months passed. Council analysts monitored human space and saw what they expected to see: reduced traffic, declining exports, fading diplomatic signals. Communication intercepts fell silent. No distress calls crossed the borders. No refugee fleets fled toward safer systems. Reports were filed. Containment successful. Situation stabilizing. The Council congratulated itself. What it failed to understand was that humanity had not been dependent on galactic systems out of necessity, but convenience. And convenience, once removed, revealed something the Council had not accounted for. Humans adapted. Trade routes vanished, so they rebuilt supply chains internally. External markets closed, so production was redesigned for self-sufficiency. Diplomatic channels collapsed, so coordination shifted inward, faster and cleaner than before. Old debates ended quickly. Indecision vanished. Redundancy became doctrine. Isolation did not fracture humanity. It simplified them. Every sanction clarified priorities. Every restriction sharpened resolve. Every insult stripped away illusion. The Council waited for collapse. Instead, they created a species with no reason left to negotiate, no incentive to comply, and no illusion that the galaxy would ever act in their interest. And while the Galactic Council watched human space grow quieter and marked it as decline, humanity was learning exactly how much could be accomplished. When no one was left to ask permission from, the Council expected collapse. What they built instead was focus. Isolation did not break humanity. It stripped them down to essentials. For generations, human civilization had been fragmented by nations, corporations, ideologies, and the long echo of conflicts that predated their expansion into space. Even among the stars, those divisions persisted. Colonies answered to different authorities. Militaries planned for contingencies against one another. Cooperation existed, but it was conditional. The Council believed isolation would tear those fractures open. Instead, it erased them. When the borders closed and trade routes went dark, there was no confusion about what had happened. Humanity understood immediately that the galaxy had made its decision. There would be no intervention, no compromise, no safety net. Survival would be internal, or not at all. Emergency assemblies formed across human space within days. Rival governments found themselves seated at the same tables, staring at the same projections of shortages, hostile borders, and uncertain futures. Arguments erupted, as they always had, but this time they ended with action. Unity was no longer aspirational. It was mandatory. Earth did not declare authority. It became a reference point, a logistical and strategic anchor rather than a throne. Colonies aligned not out of loyalty, but necessity. Fragmentation meant failure. Separate chains broke faster. Disunity created exploitable gaps. Within months, treaties that had defined human politics for centuries were dissolved. Corporate sovereignties were stripped away without ceremony. Military commands once designed to deter each other merged into a single structure with a singular mandate. Protect humanity. Unified human command was established, not as an empire, not as a ruling body, but as a coordination framework built for survival. It was blunt, adaptable, and unconcerned with appearances. All colonies stood under one command. Not through coercion, but consensus forged under pressure. Resources flowed freely. Agricultural worlds fed industrial hubs. Research stations opened their archives entirely. Shipyards synchronized production schedules across light years, reducing distance to a logistical variable rather than a barrier. Isolation forced efficiency. Redundancy became doctrine. Every system learned to operate independently if cut off, yet reintegrate seamlessly when contact returned. Supply chains were hardened against disruption. Communications were rebuilt with layered encryption and autonomous relays so no single failure could ever silence humanity again. Something deeper changed as well. Humans stopped thinking in terms of my world and your world. They began thinking in terms of us. Education shifted. History was reframed, not as a catalogue of internal conflict, but as a record of adaptation under pressure. Children learned why the galaxy had turned away, and why reliance on external protection was a mistake that could never be repeated. Culture followed strategy. Art became restrained and purposeful. Music emphasized rhythm and endurance. Stories stopped waiting for rescue and began ending with humanity standing together against an uncaring universe. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Civilian industries merged with defense research. Medical advances fed directly into survivability programs. Terraforming technologies were repurposed into planetary defense systems. Infrastructure designed for hostile environments became the foundation for ships and stations meant to endure catastrophic failure. Humanity did not become aggressive. They became deliberate. Risk was calculated. Loss was anticipated. Survival was engineered. From the outside, human space appeared quiet. Council analysts mistook the lack of outward communication for stagnation. Traffic remained low. Diplomacy was absent. Protest never came. But inside, humanity moved with unified intent. By the time long-range sensors began to notice something unsettling, human systems behaving less like isolated points and more like synchronized components of a single organism, it was already too late to reverse. Isolation had done what centuries of diplomacy never achieved. It unified humanity completely. The Council had expected fragmentation. What they created instead was a civilization that no longer needed permission to act, and no longer waited to be protected. Humanity had accepted the galaxy's silence, and in doing so, learned how to answer it. Silence settled over human space. To the Galactic Council, it looked like retreat. Declining traffic. Fewer transmissions. A civilization turning inward under pressure. Analysts filed reports predicting stagnation, resource depletion, eventual collapse. Humanity never corrected them. Because in that silence, humanity evolved. Freed from external oversight and obsolete treaties, human research accelerated with ruthless clarity. No projects were shelved for political discomfort. No innovations were delayed for diplomatic approval. Every question was reduced to its most basic form. Will this keep us alive? Old propulsion theory was the first casualty. Human engineers had long suspected that conventional hyperspace travel was constrained not by physics, but by tradition. The galaxy treated faster-than-light movement as a perfected science. Humans treated it as a compromise. In isolated laboratories and deep space test ranges, they began tearing assumptions apart. New engines emerged. Not louder. Not flashier. Smarter. Human drives no longer forced their way through spacetime, they negotiated with it. Micro-adjustments during transit allowed ships to alter exit vectors mid-jump, arriving where prediction models said they could not. Fixed lanes became optional. Interception became unreliable. To outside observers, when any existed, human movement appeared erratic. In truth, it was liberated. Defense evolved alongside mobility. Council shields relied on absorption, soaking energy until failure. Human shields rejected endurance in favor of redirection. Incoming force was folded, diffused, and bled into controlled distortions of space. Energy weapons vanished on impact. Kinetic strikes unraveled before contact. Test logs stopped celebrating milestones. They simply recorded outcomes. Integrity maintained. Systems stable. Hull design followed the same philosophy. Ships were no longer built from static alloys but grown from adaptive composites. Materials hardened under stress, reconfigured after impact, and learned from damage patterns. Every hit made the next one less effective. Unbreakable was unrealistic. Survivable was repeatable. Shipyards expanded in places the Council never monitored. Hollowed asteroids, dead systems written off as worthless, gravitational shadows where sensors degraded and probes failed. Fleets were assembled quietly, efficiently, without ceremony or announcement. And those fleets were different. No ceremonial flagships. No towering command spires. No designs meant to inspire awe. Human vessels were blunt, modular, and redundant by design. Every ship could fight. Every ship could repair another. Every ship could operate alone, or integrate seamlessly into a larger formation. Doctrine changed with technology. Human fleets trained for disruption. Command structures assumed losses and adapted instantly. Decision-making was decentralized, resilient, and fast. Artificial intelligences did not replace human judgment. They amplified it, filtering chaos into clarity without removing responsibility. These fleets were not built to conquer. They were built to endure. While the galaxy looked away, absorbed in politics, internal rivalries, and the comfortable belief that humanity was contained, humanity prepared for scenarios no one else modeled. Council analysts eventually noticed inconsistencies. Energy readings that didn't match decline projections. Systems that showed no signs of economic collapse. Hyperspace distortions that appeared briefly, then vanished. The reports were discussed, questioned, dismissed. Humanity was isolated, marginalized, irrelevant. They were supposed to be fading. No one asked the dangerous question. What if silence didn't mean weakness? What if it meant coordination? By the time the galaxy realized that human space no longer behaved like a collection of systems, but like a single, deliberate entity, it was already too late to intervene. Because while the Galactic Council had been watching in silence, humanity had been preparing to decide what happened next. And when they finally emerged, it would not be with demands or declarations. It would be with capability. Quiet. Measured. Unavoidable. The First World fell before the Council understood it was under attack. One moment it was a thriving hub, trade lanes intersecting, habitats glowing against the void. The next, its orbital defenses were wreckage, its skies burning with precise, indifferent fire. There was no declaration of war. No demands. No attempt at communication. Only execution. The invaders did not announce themselves. They did not need to. Within days, the galaxy named them the Dominion, because nothing else fit. They did not raid. They did not conquer in the old sense. They processed. Worlds fell in rapid succession. Some were sterilized from orbit, their surfaces reduced to lifeless glass. Others were stripped methodically, resources harvested, infrastructure dismantled with surgical care. Entire populations were taken alive, loaded into vast transports and carried away to destinations that did not appear on any map. Species were enslaved, not for labor alone, but for categorization, assimilation, experimentation. Dominion doctrine, what little could be deciphered, treated sentient life as raw material. Resistance was not punished. It was corrected. The galaxy panicked. Trade lanes collapsed under refugee traffic. Emergency signals flooded every frequency until meaning dissolved into static. Fleets that had dominated their regions for millennia were annihilated in hours, their commanders dying without ever understanding why their tactics failed. The Dominion adapted faster than anything the galaxy had faced. Every failed defense became obsolete data. Every successful maneuver was countered the next time. Every assumption the galaxy relied upon proved fatal. The Galactic Council convened in permanent emergency session. They argued. Some demanded total war. Others insisted the Dominion could be reasoned with, that no intelligence capable of such coordination could be truly hostile. Old rivalries resurfaced as empires accused one another of provoking the invasion or withholding technology. Votes were cast, recast, delayed. While the Council debated, systems burned. Entire sectors vanished from navigational charts. Council-aligned worlds fell buying time measured in minutes. Evacuation requests were denied due to strategic limitations. Civilizations that had trusted the Council for protection realized too late that protection had never been guaranteed. And then someone noticed something wrong. The Dominion advance slowed. Not everywhere. Only near a region the galaxy had long ignored. Human space. Dominion fleets that tore through Council territory with merciless efficiency began altering course near former human borders. Recon probes sent across those boundaries never returned. No debris. No signals. Just absence. Human worlds were untouched. No burning skies. No refugee armadas. No distress calls. Just silence. Fear crept into the Council chamber, not only of the Dominion, but of what that silence implied. Humanity had not collapsed. Humanity had not fled. Humanity had not been surprised. Humanity had been ready. Reluctantly, desperately, the Council did what it had avoided for generations. They turned to humanity. An emergency transmission was authorized, bypassing restrictions the Council itself had imposed. The signal crossed borders sealed years earlier and entered human space without resistance. The reply came almost immediately. Not from a diplomat. Not from a civilian authority. From unified human command. The human on the screen looked calm. Not alarmed. Not vindicated. Focused. "You are requesting assistance," the human said, voice even. The Council speaker struggled to maintain composure. "The Dominion threatens all sentient life. We request immediate military support. All previous measures against humanity can be reconsidered." Fear, dressed as diplomacy. "You watched us," the human replied. "You isolated us. You expected us to fail quietly." The chamber stirred. "The Dominion was not unexpected," the commander continued. "We modeled this scenario decades ago." Silence fell. "Our fleets were not built for conquest," the human said. "They were built because we knew the galaxy would hesitate when hesitation was fatal." The Council speaker leaned forward, desperation finally breaking protocol. "Will you help us?" A pause followed, long enough to make the answer feel earned. "Yes," the human said. Relief surged through the chamber. Then the condition arrived. "But not under your command." The words landed like gravity. "We will engage the Dominion," the commander continued. "We will halt their advance and protect civilian populations. But understand this, we are not restoring your authority." The human's gaze hardened. "You watched in silence while the galaxy burned." "We did not." The transmission ended. Across human space, systems awakened. Shipyards unlocked. Fleets that had never appeared on any registry powered up in flawless coordination. Movements rippled through regions the Dominion had avoided by instinct rather than knowledge. And as Dominion sensors registered something vast, structured, and deliberate moving toward the front, for the first time since the invasion began, the Dominion hesitated. Because the enemy now facing them was not a fractured council arguing in chambers. It was a civilization that had grown in silence, prepared without approval, and learned how to take control when no one else would. The Council had watched humanity quietly. Now it watched in silence for a different reason. It no longer decided what happened next. The Galactic Council expected forgiveness. They had lifted restrictions in haste, reopened channels long sealed, and spoken carefully shaped words of regret. In Council tradition, this was how crises ended, authority acknowledged, mistakes quietly buried beneath urgency and shared fear. Humanity did not respond with anger. They responded with calculation. Within unified human command, the Council's offers were parsed without emotion. Apologies were noted. Concessions logged. Strategic projections continued to run uninterrupted. Dominion advance vectors overlaid with civilian density maps. Probability curves updated in real time. Forgiveness never entered the discussion. Timing did. The Council's messages became more frequent as systems continued to burn. Each carried greater urgency, broader authority, louder assurances of partnership. Beneath them all lay the same assumption. Humanity would rush in. They did not. Instead, a single reply was transmitted, plain, unembellished, broadcast across all diplomatic channels. We will decide when to act. The chamber fell silent. Some counselors bristled at the defiance. Others felt something colder take hold. Humanity was not asking for permission. They were stating a boundary. The galaxy no longer set their pace. Behind sealed borders and encrypted networks, humanity moved. Activation orders cascaded through human space in synchronized waves. Fleets long held in readiness aligned to microsecond precision. Deep space installations emerged from stealth, their mass hidden until the moment concealment no longer mattered. Humanity was not forming a battle line. They were shaping the environment. Soon after, space itself began to tremble. Not from explosions. Not from weapons fire. From strain. Across multiple sectors, long-range sensors recorded impossible readings. Hyperspace currents warped under artificial pressure. Navigation systems failed, recalibrated, failed again. Stars appeared to flicker as space-time bent into unfamiliar configurations. This was not an attack. It was preparation. Human scientists called it a containment lattice, a controlled manipulation of gravity wells, hyperspace flow, and quantum boundaries designed to restrict Dominion movement without triggering collapse. Risky. Unprecedented. Already active. Dominion fleets slowed. Not because they were challenged. Because physics began refusing them. The Council watched as projections changed in real time. Advance corridors narrowed. Flanking routes vanished. Regions once open to rapid invasion became constrained, predictable, controllable. Humanity had not entered the war. They had rewritten its rules. A final transmission from unified human command reached every major power, Council and Dominion alike. This conflict will proceed under controlled conditions, it stated. Escalation will not be permitted. No threats followed. None were needed. Humanity had made its decision long before the Council asked for help. They would not rush in to redeem those who had hesitated. They would not gamble lives to preserve old authority. They would act when action guaranteed survival. Space continued to tremble, not in fear, but adjustment. Because the galaxy was learning something the Council never had. Control did not come from command. It came from preparation. And humanity had been preparing long before anyone was watching. The war did not begin with a declaration. It began with silence. Along the fractured front where Dominion fleets advanced unchecked, space folded with deliberate precision. There were no hyperspace flares, no energy surges, no warning signatures that ancient sensors had been designed to detect. One moment, the void was empty. The next, humanity arrived. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence, their transitions so clean that Dominion systems registered them only after every formation had already locked into place. Thousands of vessels held position without drift, without collision, without chaos, as if space itself had been waiting for them. They were massive. They were precise. They were unstoppable. There were no banners. No threat displays. No posturing maneuvers meant to intimidate. Human ships did not advance or scatter. They simply were. Dominion command reacted instantly. Targeting arrays spun up. Weapon systems charged. Adaptive algorithms recalculated engagement probabilities at machine speed. Before the first shot could be authorized, a single transmission crossed every channel at once: Council frequencies, Dominion command bands, civilian emergency networks. 2 words. Stand down. The message was calm, flat, final. The Dominion ignored it. Their opening salvo never reached its targets. Energy weapons bent away as space-time curved under controlled manipulation. Kinetic projectiles lost coherence mid-flight, shredded by localized gravity distortions that tore their trajectories apart. Entire Dominion squadrons froze in place as propulsion systems were locked inside containment fields they could not override or escape. Then humanity moved. Not forward. Through. Human strike groups vanished and reappeared inside Dominion formations, bypassing outer defenses as if they were theoretical constructs rather than physical barriers. Command vessels were isolated and neutralized in seconds. Power cut, communications severed, crews contained without hull breaches or catastrophic loss of life. This was not a battle. It was disassembly. Resistance flared in isolated pockets, and ended just as quickly. Human weapons targeted propulsion, energy cores, and command infrastructure with surgical accuracy. Dominion ships were left intact but helpless, drifting inside controlled spatial envelopes that denied movement, communication, or retaliation. Across multiple sectors, the Dominion advance halted simultaneously. Slave transports were intercepted and secured. Occupied worlds felt the shift as overseers lost coordination, supply chains collapsed, and escape routes vanished without warning. For the first time since the invasion began, silence spread, not the silence of fear, but of control. The Galactic Council watched in stunned disbelief. This was war without chaos. Victory without devastation. Dominance without spectacle. Human fleets repositioned again, moving deeper and wider, forming a flawless three-dimensional encirclement around Dominion core territories. Hyperspace corridors collapsed into monitored choke points. Every vector of retreat disappeared as space itself was rewritten around them. Only then did the Dominion attempt communication. Humanity answered once. "This conflict is over," the transmission stated. "You simply failed to recognize the moment it ended." There was no final explosion. No desperate counteroffensive. No heroic last stand. The Dominion stood down, not because they had been outnumbered or outgunned, but because the concept of battle itself had been denied to them. Adaptation meant nothing when the environment no longer permitted combat. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. And across the galaxy, a realization settled with chilling clarity. Humanity had not taken control through conquest. They had taken control by deciding when conflict was allowed to exist at all. The Council had watched in silence. Now, so did everyone else. The Galactic Council tried to reclaim control. In the war's aftermath, the chambers filled with familiar sounds, formal addresses, drafted resolutions, declarations of restored authority. Committees were formed to oversee reconstruction. Jurisdiction was asserted over liberated systems. The Council spoke as it always had, assuming that naming power was the same as possessing it. It was too late. The galaxy had already seen where control truly resided. Humanity did not challenge the Council's claims. They did not argue for seats, titles, or veto power. While speeches echoed through ceremonial halls, human fleets were already disengaging, stabilizing hyperspace corridors, dismantling Dominion remnants, and ensuring displaced populations returned safely to their worlds. No banners were raised. No authority proclaimed. When Council patrols arrived to secure systems, they found nothing left to secure. Defenses were calibrated. Local governance restored. Supply lines functioning. Human task forces were already gone, their work finished without acknowledgement or ceremony. The Council attempted leverage. Sanctions were proposed, and quietly dropped. Political pressure was applied, and ignored. Invitations were extended, offering humanity a central role in galactic leadership. Humanity declined. They did not rule the galaxy. They had seen what rule looked like when certainty replaced listening. They had watched what happened when authority hesitated while lives burned. Humanity had no interest in becoming another voice that spoke too late. They chose something else. Across the stars, behavior changed. Pirate fleets dissolved when human signatures appeared on long-range sensors. Slaver networks collapsed without confrontation. Border conflicts stalled, not because treaties were signed, but because escalation now carried consequences no one could afford. No ultimatums were issued. No threats delivered. Presence was enough. Humanity became a constant, not an empire, not a council, but a certainty. A civilization that watched quietly, prepared relentlessly, and acted decisively when action was required. They proved a truth the galaxy could no longer deny. Power was not age. It was not tradition. It was not authority spoken aloud. It was readiness. If darkness rises again, if something vast and hostile moves through the deep between stars, if warnings are dismissed and hesitation returns, humanity will be there, not to rule, not to command, but to stand between the galaxy and extinction, as they did when no one else would. The Galactic Council watched in silence as humanity took control. And for the first time in its long history, silence was not ignorance. It was understanding.